Where?
Good guess, but wrong.
So does anyone here know the movie that is from? Yeah, one hand in the room. Yeah, Ghostbusters. This is Bill Murray, and in this scene, it's a really funny scene. He keeps shocking this poor guy. Even if he gets it right, he's just shocking him through the whole scene. What's not funny is that Ghostbusters scene was inspired by a real-life experiment. Does anyone here know about the experiment or know the name of the doctor who conducted it? Any hands at all? One person, two? Oh, y'all are in for a treat. This is a really fun story. So to get right into it, this is the agenda I'll go through. I'm going to talk through the quick story of that experiment, talk a little bit about the results of it, and then I will describe how you can use that knowledge to your advantage. Use it professionally, use it personally, and then finally, we'll close with questions and answers. I really think it's just a fascinating story, so I hope you enjoy it. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Stanley Milgram, Dr. Milgram, the fellow who created the experiment that I'm about to describe. He was the second of 3 children in a working class family growing up in the Bronx. He did his graduate studies at Harvard, and after graduating with a PhD, he took a position at Yale University. And the reason that I'm sharing all that with you is I need to point out to you that Dr. Milgram operated at the world's highest levels of education and examination. So it's worth it to take a look at his experiment. Here's where it gets a little interesting. This is a picture of people accused of acts of genocide in the World War II Nuremberg trials. So many of these people kept saying over and over again, "My defense is that I was just following orders." Just following orders. And it struck Dr. Milgram, how could all of these people and their attorneys actually believe that that is an appropriate defense? It doesn't make sense. And so it stayed with him, and that's why he devised this experiment. He wanted to answer these 3 questions. Basically, how far would someone go to obey an instruction that hurts somebody else? And that third question that's up there in yellow, do people consistently do things that are not in their best interest when they confront certain situations? That last question is one that I addressed in my first book, The Prepared Investor. In fact, this whole presentation I'm giving to you is the details behind a short story at the beginning of chapter 7 of this book. I do have copies of it here. If someone wants to pick up a book, I can also sign books after the presentation. Just a shameless plug there. But back to the questions. This is what Milgram wanted to answer. And in order to do that, he devised a very sneaky experiment. He thought that he could test whether or not people would hurt or even kill another human being. And the experiment looked like this. There's 3 people in the room, and 2 of them are actors, and 1 of them is a volunteer. So here's an actor, the experimenter, and here's an actor, the student. And this is a real volunteer. This teacher thinks that the student is also a volunteer. The teacher believes that they both were volunteers and that they're working with this actor who's in a scientist lab coat costume. The teacher believes that he's testing the student's memory, just like Bill Murray in the movie Ghostbusters. Now you can see there's a wall here. The teacher cannot see the student. He speaks into an intercom, and then this wire is hooked up to the student, and when the student gets the answer wrong, the teacher shocks him. And that's the setup of the experiment. How to get volunteers. Milgram put an ad in the paper offering to pay $4 an hour and cover cab fare. And back in those days, this was very compelling. He had a lot of volunteers. They did a number of these experiments with variations just to be sure that they'd covered all the bases. So when someone showed up, the first thing they had to do was draw straws because they wanted to make this volunteer see the other actor as a volunteer and believe that they could have been the student. Every single time, the actual volunteer is drawing the straw and becomes the teacher. It's rigged. But they believe they could have been the other person that was on the side of the wall getting shocked. This is a photo of one of the convincing student actors getting rigged up with the electrical wires, and it's all fake. There isn't any electricity, but the whole point is to convince that volunteer teacher that this is real and that they're testing the person's memory. Here is one of the teachers sitting at the contraption there. It's a convincing looking electrical generator with a lot of switches and buttons. So he's Bill Murray in this experiment being done in the Yale Interaction Laboratory. There's a close-up on the generator that the teacher can see. It's a pretty imposing piece of equipment. So the idea is that each time that the student gets an answer wrong, the teacher has to go to the next higher level of shock. So on the far left of the machine, it starts at 15 volts, and it's labeled as slight shock. But at the far right of the machine, it's 450 volts, and it's labeled danger, severe shock. Of course, the student actor is not being shocked, but the teacher believes that each time they press that button, they are shocking the person on the other side of that wall. You're looking at what the lab coat costumed actor would say in every experiment. Only these 4 things, and only in this order. It was incredibly controlled. This is the script. So the idea here is that if the teacher questions the situation or doesn't want to press the button and shock the student, the scientist would say, please continue. And if the teacher continues to have a question or a concern, the scientist would then say, the experiment requires you to continue. All you have to do is just harass the scientist enough to get past the 4 statements, and the experiment is over. The expectation of Milgram and the staff was that this would happen pretty quickly, that they would be ending the experiment in about 5 to 10 minutes. And originally, they were scheduling 6 to 7 people per hour to do the experiment. But let's take a look at the student script. It is a lot more interesting and a lot longer. So there isn't a need for anything said at 15 volts. That's where it started. But once we get to 75 volts, the student starts to clearly explain that they're being hurt with a little ugh. And then it progresses to, hey, this hurts. At 150 volts, it ratchets up a bit. The student says, I have heart trouble. I quit. Get me out of here. Now, when I was reading and learning about this in my research for my book, I felt that if I was the teacher, this is where I would have stopped. I had imagined that the person is saying that their heart is hurting them and that they quit, that I would have harassed the scientist enough and the experiment would have ended there for me. And I see some people nodding their heads. Probably a lot of people are thinking, yeah, the guy just said he quits. He says he has heart trouble. That's where you would quit. Okay. The script writers, though, needed to be ready for the rare person that might go farther. So it continues. As you read through this, try to imagine hearing it. Imagine a convincing actor in another room yelling fearfully that their heart is bothering them, that they're in pain. They're shouting and begging to get me out of here. Because remember, they're strapped into the chair. Try to imagine you've just pressed the 195 volt button and you're hearing all of those statements there. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. And if you ask another question, the student answers wrong on purpose, and now you have to press the 210 button. This is intense. And Dr. Milgram devised it this way on purpose. The script continues. They wanted to be ready for that rare person who might go this far, to look at this a little bit closer, at 285, there is no coherent message. The actor is just screaming through the intercom for the teacher to hear. This is the end of the script, and it's the end of the experiment. I'd like you to take a look at how this works. At 345 volts, and then again at 435 volts, there is just silence. Any rational volunteer would interpret that as they're unconscious or worse after all of the discussion of heart trouble. And if this person was going to continue shocking that student, the experiment says that they're going to shock at 450 volts, the highest on the machine, 3 times in a row, 3 different questions, and just continue to shock the unresponsive learner. And at that point, Milgram's scriptwriter is out of ideas. The experiment is over. This is what the experiment is supposed to look like in that rare situation that somebody goes that far. Who would like to see the results of the experiment? By a show of hands. We don't have to see it if you don't. Okay, enough of you want to see it. Okay. You're not going to like it. Volunteer after volunteer, experiment after experiment, the majority of volunteer teachers continue to the highest level of 450 volts, despite all the signs that they were hurting, perhaps killing the person on the other side of the wall. The red part of this pie chart is when the experiment was ended by the scientist actor because they didn't have any more script to go through. But you and I, we wouldn't be in the red, right? I certainly didn't think I would. I thought I would have stopped at 150. In fact, if you remember at 285, there was just screaming. I personally had imagined that after 285, where people hear just incoherent screaming, that nobody would go to the next level. No one would get to 300 is what I had guessed. The data does not show that. Every single participant went to 300 volts. This is not a pie chart, ladies and gentlemen. This is one color. Let's go back to the previous chart. So the red is when the person went to the very end of the experiment. Everyone else in the blue went to at least 300 volts. Everybody. There is no little sliver here to represent a single person doing something less than 300 volts. Study after study, 18 variations of this experiment were conducted with large groups of volunteers. Milgram effectively concluded that ordinary people are highly likely to follow orders given by an authority figure that they believe in. And they follow those orders despite morality or value. And this is a very pessimistic idea. And I promise you, in the next 5 minutes, we're going to turn this around and make it a lot more positive. To say this all another way, with the right catalyst, untrained, unprepared people are extremely predictable. And that is why, if every single light at this intersection were to change into a green light at the exact same time, there would be a car accident. People perceive the stoplight as an authority, appropriately telling them what to do. But not everyone would have an accident at an all-green intersection. Federal agents attend a driving academy that teaches them that those red lights are just guides. They're predictors. They are not an authority, and they'll run red lights or drive up on the sidewalk if they have to. It's not just agents I'm talking about. I'm talking about everyone in this room. Everyone in here has been in this situation where it's the middle of the night and you have stopped at a red light for no reason. There is no one around, and yet there we sit, waiting for the light to turn green. This is a major tenet in my first book, The Prepared Investor. Whether we're hitting the brakes to stop at a useless red light in the middle of the night, whether we're selling the stock of a perfectly good company in a crisis, or whether we're electrically shocking an innocent human being, the vast majority of people are going to press the button. It's a matter of training. The bottom line is that a particular catalyst inspires a particular result. If we believe in the structure of the system per Milgram's results, and if we believe in the role that we have in the role of the authority of the person giving us orders, we're highly likely to do what we're told. And that, I know, is pessimistic. This is what Milgram wrote in his article, The Perils of Obedience. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of this study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. I think we can leave the explaining to the PhDs and the doctors. How about if you and I just accept that this is part of our nature? Because if we do that, it changes the situation entirely. The question then becomes, who or what is your perceived authority? You can choose, ladies and gentlemen. If we accept that we're predisposed to do what someone in charge says, then put someone in charge that is telling you to do something that's good for you. This is why the coaching profession exists, both in the athletic and the business world. It's what explains how an Olympic athlete, arguably the best in the world at their sport, would possibly accept any guidance or instruction from a coach who cannot compete at the same elite level. This is what explains why parents are so important in society. It talks to the power and the value of mentors. In fact, would you please stand up if your career is one of coaching or giving advice? If that's the career you're in, would you stand right now? Ladies and gentlemen, the people that are standing, you want to get their card. And the reason I'm saying that is because they have a bit more influence. They have a bit more influence than the folks that are sitting down, just because of human nature. Thank you for standing. You go ahead and sit down. And by the way, a lot of you are in the role of guiding and helping other people. That's really impressive. My firm also is in an advisory role. And these are a couple of my colleagues who are both here today. These are partners, shareholders, part owners of the company. And when they're working with their clients and the engagement is operating at its best, there's a lot more that's happening than just gain and loss numbers and statements. It's a really valuable interaction. The point of my talk, though, is not to say you should have a financial advisor. It's to say that this is part of what makes us tick. You could team up with a teacher, a pastor, a parent, anybody that you trust. And if you have a belief in their authority, you're on the right track. But if you don't believe in their expertise and in their authority, then you need to find a different teacher or pastor. You're not going to do so well finding another parent, sadly. And if you're not related to them, by the way, a great way to make sure that there is a sense of authority and respect between you is to pay them. It's also part of Milgram's work. Another idea that came from his work is that you are looking for somebody that you know you will listen to when they're telling you something you don't want to hear. That is the right answer. And I have friends and acquaintances that take this so seriously that they've surrounded themselves with a board of advisors, individuals that have complementing expertise. And they don't do anything important in their life without consulting that group. In fact, this concept makes me think about the organization that is sponsoring my talk this morning. They are a group of complementing experts. If they have someone in their room that makes widgets, and you make widgets, you cannot join their group. They want to have individual people that they can lean on. It's an excellent board of advisors. So really, apart from an interesting story about an experiment that I'm sure you all will remember, it's an unforgettable story. My main ask is that you consider joining this group. It's a very powerful way to push yourself in the direction that you want to go. Talk to the person that invited you here and ask them about joining. If this is not the right forum and if this doesn't work with your setup, then consider finding that coach, that professional or personal third party that you believe can push you in the right direction. The idea here is that those 4 prods, remember, please continue. The experiment requires you continue. If those prods are so powerful, imagine if you have them working for you, pushing you in the direction that you want to go. That can be incredibly powerful. With that, I will conclude by suggesting that we all want to get very good at saying, let me run that by my coach. I want to talk to my advisor first. I will decide after I consult with my advisory team. We are proven to have this in our nature, ladies and gentlemen, so take advantage of it. We do have time for questions, and I know everyone won't have a question, but everyone does have a cell phone. And I hope that you'll pull them out right now. Go ahead and snap a photo of me up here or snap a photo of you in the crowd. This is a networking organization. Our virtual networks are just as important. And this is a great chance to take a photo, put it into your LinkedIn, post it up, tag the person that invited you. Feel free to tag me. I am glad to help to put more eyes onto your post. I see a lot of you have your phones out. Thank you for that. I think it's very valuable. And then my last note is I really take your questions seriously. From the introduction, you've heard I have been published. I can talk to the writing process. I run a company in Houston. I can talk to leadership or investing. I can talk to, I have triplets. I can talk to parenting multiples, being married for 20-something years. If you think I can weigh in on it, I would love to try to make your time here as valuable as possible. With that, who has the first question? Sir.
Now, one of the barriers to this is fear of retribution. So I'm curious what your experience is, especially in the military, where you had a command position and your soldiers, did you experience this, or how did you deal with it, right? Because that's one of the biggest barriers. Oh, I don't want to be a whistleblower because really it'll get around, or it'll affect my career, or the fear of advancement, right? So how did you deal with that?
Well, not easily, and and I just said how I would take your question seriously, so I will do my best to be vulnerable here. One of the things that I had a lot of struggle with was the transition from the green machine to the corporate world. It was not an easy time for me. And as part of that transition, I ended up connecting with other service members who also had their personal hardships with following orders. And I have gotten a lot of personal satisfaction out of being a resource to them and helping them. But I don't think I would be as helpful if I hadn't had some personal experience with difficult orders. And sometimes the order is not difficult until after things are done. And then you realize, boy, this is weighing heavily on me. And you don't know what you're doing until after it's done in many cases. So thanks for the question. Sir.
I remember as a kid, we used to have the bomb scares, and they used to have us diving underneath our desk. And I remember my teacher goes, everybody get underneath this desk, the sirens go off. And I remember telling my teacher, this is not going to protect you from a nuclear explosion. The teacher said, shut up, Eddie, and get underneath the desk. And it is so much part of our programming at the most youngest age. I'm talking about first grade, telling me to get underneath the desk, underneath a nuclear explosion, and everybody else went. So I really see how this has been processed in our lives at the most youngest age, that to do something as ridiculous as getting underneath the desk, when you're watching all these war movies of shit being, pardon the expression, blown up, and it just, I can easily see this happening. I mean, and of course, war, where it's just your background, when you take perfectly healthy, nice kids that would, wouldn't run over a squirrel crossing the street, and then we have them doing whatever. So I guess it's not really a question, it's more of a statement, just seeing how early we're being programmed to do shut up, Eddie, and do it, and how difficult it was to resist it and then comply anyway.
Thank you for the comment. Jason?
Could you speak into about the Law 150 and how that applies in your business and how it applies in life in general?
This is the 150 people you're capable of connecting with? Yeah, sure. So there's work that's been done that shows that as an animal, we have a certain capacity for relationships. We can't have a meaningful relationship with 1,000 people. We just don't have that emotional depth. But we can have a really meaningful, sincere relationship with a certain number of folks. And it appears with some research that for most of us, it tops out at about 150. So if you want to have a cadre of clients that you know really well, or you want to have a classroom of students that you know really well, once you get beyond 150 people, it's really hard to have the depth. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but you're going to need to pay attention to the systems that you have in place and the technology that you're using, and be sure that you're putting real effort into those relationships, because you're pushing up against Mother Nature once you get past 150. Thanks for the question. Yes, ma'am.
Leadership, given what you were talking about and some of the questions, how do you create an environment at work that encourages and allows people to ask questions and to push back on that without fear of retribution?
Right. I think that there's a lot of different ways to approach that, and there are some amazing thought leaders for that. Simon Sinek, I always say his name wrong, but Simon Sinek is a great person to check out and listen to some of his thoughts. For me personally, from the military and from the corporate world, I believe strongly that if the leader at the top of the organization proves through action that they care more about the client or the product or the mission of the organization more than their personal advancement or more than making a buck, then everyone will fall in line that we're all trying to do this the best we can. And I think a great way to show the people around you that you will not face retribution if you do something that is off the beaten path is to reward people when they truly do something better. They took the initiative and they're doing something that maybe is off the reservation and it ends up being better. Then you need to reward them, and you can't stifle that. And once you do that, everyone else looks and says, wow, that's the way it is here. And by the way, this is something Noah Yuval Harari writes a lot about. You all should check his work out. His last name Harari. He talks about how we are very special in nature because we can look at someone else do something and internalize the lesson. It's very uncommon in Mother Nature. So for example, if I see one of you touch that wall and it looks like it hurt you, I don't have to touch the wall. I know it hurt. And that's a really interesting piece of what makes us tick. And leaders can effectively make that real by publicly rewarding somebody when they do something like what you're talking about, where maybe people would feel that there could be retribution or they went against the grain. And when you reward them and everyone knows that the reward was there, that's a very strong signal. I hope that answered your question. Yes, ma'am. Always.
So much of what you talked about is essentially a contradiction of someone's value systems. And considering, let's just say present day, when it comes down to compliance for the common good, where do you draw the line?
That's a tough one. So this is something that right now is a hot topic. I think in the last 24 hours, you'll see in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article that talks about a survey from 20 years ago and the same survey today. And that from 20 years ago, people were saying that they had certain values like patriotism, doing things for social good, charity, and that all of those things have gone down. Every single value on the questionnaire has gone down in the last 20 years, except for one. The only value that has increased is the importance that people place on money. That's a strong statement. I think that if we could all leave here with a personal desire to be an ambassador to our individual communities of the importance of honesty, integrity, charity, faith, things that sometimes we give lip service to, but if we really dedicate real attention to those, that can make a big difference. I am a believer that an individual can make a big difference. And I think each of you have the power to make your communities better. I hope that answers your question, because it was a tough one. Thank you. It looks like we have one more question.
Thank you for speaking today, but you seem like such an accomplished individual. You have this wonderful business. You're the author of multiple books. You've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in the military. What has been a big driving factor to achieving your personal goals and such a high level of success?
Thank you for asking. I think it depends on what accomplishment we're talking about. I'll tell the one that is the least self-serving, so I don't seem like too much of an egomaniac. So when I first got into finance, I had left the military. I was very insecure about my credentials as a financial advisor. I felt like I knew a lot about things that had nothing to do with being a financial advisor, and I knew nothing about things like investing in the economy and financial planning. And that insecurity really drove me. I had a fear of doing badly for the people that were putting their faith in me and putting their trust in me. And that fear and insecurity really pushed me to do a mountain more than I needed to. And my resume from my second year in the business to my 10th year, it looked like someone who really had a lot of extra time. And I didn't, but it looked like I did. So I think negative things can propel you forward, and positive things too. You just want to make sure you've got your why and you're honest with yourself about it. I also mentioned, you didn't ask this question, but I think it's worth saying that no matter what mountain you climb or what accomplishment you get or how much money, especially in our business, how much money is such a big question. There's always someone else who's got something to teach you. There's always someone else who's done something better than you ever could. And if you can keep yourself focused on that truth, that'll help out a lot as you continue to try to get to the next horizon. So that's all the time we have. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate it.